Let me ask Dr. Atkins this. Does your rooted position require that under no circumstances should the laws be suspended, so that, for instance, the recorded testimony of 100 scientists at Lourdes, that certain inexplicable cures actually happen, inexplicable by the laws of nature. Do you simply take the David Hume position that there has got to be an errancy in human testimony because you are a priori committed to this impossibility?
No. I think if you think of miracles at Lourdes, there are two possible explanations. One is that the reporters are liars, which is the Hume position, and that, of course, is quite likely to be the case, but is not the only possibility. The other possibility is that some kind of cure did take place, which the doctors who are reporting that they didn't understand what went on simply didn't understand. I believe that anything that has been reported reliably, anything, can be interpreted scientifically within the framework of modern science.
Now, Dr. Craig, you believe that the testimony to the resurrection of Christ is something which is historically impossible or simply difficult to contradict?
I wouldn't say impossible. In matters of history, we don't talk in terms of absolutes, but I would say that there are those three established facts, which...
They're not established facts. I'm sorry, they are repetitions of what is written in the Bible.
Well, insofar as you say that, Dr. Atkins, you disagree with the majority of New Testament historians who say that these facts do belong to the portrait of the historical Jesus.
But most of the historians of the New Testament are believers themselves and are desperate for it to be true, and they make it true by assertion.
I think that's a very naive view of New Testament criticism.
They certainly cannot prove that it is true.
Not in the sense of a mathematical proof, but in the sense of a historical proof.
Can we prove that Caesar was killed?
Well, exactly. It's the same sort of
No,
proof we're
it's
talking
not
about.
that there were real witnesses to Caesar's death. And on the day that it happened, there were no witnesses that
on the day that it happened,
happened on the day that Jesus purported to die.
Now, you're not denying that the crucifixion of Jesus was therefore a historical fact, are you?
It's quite likely he was crucified, at least someone was.
Yes, okay. And now, was he then buried by Joseph of Arimathea, as the Gospels report?
Well, that's what they wrote 80 years later, but I can't remember who buried my mother.
Uh-huh.
Well, maybe there was no reason to memorialize that burial.
I think it's important to understand that the New Testament critics who look at the New Testament are not, as you say, these biased believers desperate to believe in this. German New Testament criticism, which I have done my doctoral work in, is enormously skeptical and enormously influenced by the same anti-miraculous presuppositions that you evinced. And yet, the majority of critics today have found themselves driven to accept the facts of the empty tomb, the appearances of Jesus.
And the appearances of there were 87,000 appearances of Elvis last year, weren't there?
I don't think that...
Princess Di, I mean,
yes.
Princess Diana is going to be the next person to be...
Now wait, but now are you admitting, though, now that they did have these experiences of appearances, but that they were hallucinations?
I can believe that there are two possibilities. One is that they were hallucinations, that they really so missed their leader that they were desperate to see him, and they just invented this sighting. The other is that it's just a straightforward lie.
You know of 12 people who are prepared to commit their lives to the apparition of Elvis, even to the point of suffering hideous deaths?
I think that and I note your impartiality in this debate, it's very impressive.
Well,
I think that if I took 12 simple fishermen wandering around the banks of Galilee, I think that they would look for something that they could devote their lives to.
No.
These were
simple like
folk.
Paul. He wasn't one of the 12, but,
Let me
well, okay,
say
let me pick on you.
That's
now,
better. About
Dr.
time,
Craig.
with a real
Craig,
question, too.
Why, if everything you say is correct, doesn't the implicit logic of what you say totally command the academic community? Why is there so much skepticism if what you say is, to use his word, so manifestly correct?
Well, I never said it was manifestly correct. I think you can argue about any of these points, but I think that on balance, the premises are more plausible than their negations. Take the first argument that I gave. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. It seems to me that only a presuppositional antipathy toward theism would cause someone to reject those premises.
Well, this strikes you as extremely clear. Why doesn't it strike other people as extremely
Well,
clear?
as I say, I think some folks have an antipathy toward
Like his?
theism, like Dr. Atkins. I mean, it's so evident that he's got his mind made up when he said, what are the possibilities for explaining these resurrection appearances? The possibilities were lying or hallucinating. There wasn't even a possibility that they were telling the truth, that God really had done this.
Oh,
In other words, it's
yeah.
ruled out in advance.
Well, I think it's so unlikely that anything like that could happen that you have to look at the simpler explanations first. Go for the simpler explanation. Only if the simpler explanation fails and is explicitly shown to fail, go to the more complicated
I
one.
agree. I agree entirely with that. But
And the breakdown of the laws of nature by the intrusion of the finger of God is not a simple way of proceeding.
that you're misusing the criterion of simplicity. That's not what simplicity means. It means don't multiply causes beyond necessity. And in this case, the hypothesis that these men were lying or were hallucinating is simply implausible, given their willingness to die for their beliefs, which shows insincerity,
People have been
and giving
willing
the un-Jewish nature of the belief that they came to hold, which couldn't have been the product of their own imaginations.
People go for a living death by throwing themselves into nunneries and into monasteries.
But they believe that it's true. what
They
they're
believe
doing.
it's true, but
All
they're
right.
wasting their lives because of it.
But the point is that they really sincerely believe it. They're not lying. And that was
Yeah.
the point that was being made here before.
So these 12 fishermen also believed it.
Okay, so you're willing to admit they weren't lying.
I can accept that if it is true, then it is possible that they were not lying.
Okay, so then
But
that...
these were simple-minded people. And they were surrounded by miraculous events said to be going on. Maybe they just wanted to join in for the notoriety of being involved in amazing events.
But
There
you're
were people who were bored.
You think that
There wasn't much to do in Palestine at the time.
So they invented the resurrection of Jesus and endangered
Well,
their
no.
lives because they were bored?
Well, a committee invented it 70, 80 years after the event.
Well, that's impossible because we have information from Paul's letters that date within 5 years after the crucifixion of this belief in 1 Corinthians 15:3. So it's impossible to talk about 70 years later. This belief flourished within
But you
a few
don't deny
years.
that the Gospels were tampered with.
I do deny that, of course. We have the Gospels. I took Greek so that I could read them in the original texts. And the original text is reconstructed to within 99%.
Indeed. What was the word you used?
The original
Reconstructed.
text.
They were reconstructed.
Yes,
They're not
textual
reliable.
criticism. No, are you suggesting that the text of the New Testament that we have today, it does not faithfully represent the Greek text as it was originally written?
I'm claiming that the Gospels are not a correct representation of what happened 70 or 80 years before they were written.
70 or 80 years before they were written would
When was
be...
the first Gospel written?
Generally, it would be said around AD 70, I think
Indeed,
earlier.
that's what I mean, 70 or 80
Okay,
years.
but that would be after the birth of Christ. Jesus
we
died
only
in
have,
AD 30.
we only have 5 minutes,
Okay.
which is all the time we can give to the New Testament. Let's find out about this poison business. I thought that was extremely interesting.
I don't remember writing that. What was
The,
that?
I have,
did he
have it in my
misrepresent you?
briefcase.
Did Dr. Craig misrepresent you? when he said that in your treatment of poison, you don't distinguish the administration of poison from simply the event of the end of life.
I honestly don't remember writing this, but if you say I wrote it,
Yeah, I have it in my
maybe I was
briefcase.
hallucinating at the time when I wrote it.
Well, I think the point was that whether a person dies because someone's administered poison to him or because the body just forms its own poison because it's ill and dies,
Yeah.
that you said there's no moral distinction. But that is clearly transgressing the bounds of science.
that's
Science
nonsense.
could prove that there... But those are your words.
Well, so you say, but I think they're nonsense now.
Oh, well, all right. I do too.
If it's what I wrote, then I think it's nonsense.
All right,
They're
all right.
obviously taken out of context.
Have we concluded that one?
I guess.
Okay, well, then let's broaden it a little bit and get on the question of whether, defend this proposition, Dr. Craig. You said that in order to believe in moral absolutes, you have to believe in God. Why is that true? Kant, for instance, did not.
Well, we
believe-
agree on this point, that if there is no God, then there is no objective moral values, because moral values are just the socio-biological spin-off of cultural and biological evolution. But my argument is...
Well, Kant, of course, Immanuel Kant argued that there is an autonomy of ethics, that ratiocination can actually parse. Now,
Yes, though that's not an
and
issue that divides us
No,
here tonight,
it's
so I think we should stick to...
It's really the origin of ethics, and in my view, it's...
No, it's not the origin, though, Dr. Atkins. It's their objectivity that's in question. I could admit that this is how our beliefs originate, but then that's the genetic fallacy again. If you say, because our beliefs originate in this way, that therefore the beliefs are false, that's simply a fallacious form of argumentation. And I would say there's no more reason to deny that there is an objective realm of moral values than the objective realm of physical objects. And any argument you could give me to be skeptical about the objectivity of moral values, I could give a parallel argument why we should be skeptical about our sensory intuitions and doubt that there is an external
But it
world.
comes back down to whether you will accept a simpler explanation or whether you insist upon there being a more complex explanation. That's
I
all
think
it
you're
comes down to.
misusing that criterion.
It comes down to
management
that.
says we have to quit, sorry.
It comes down to that at every stage of your argument.
So we've figured out the rational reasons why Romeo fell for Juliet?
Yes, I think you can. I think you can begin to understand why one person might fall in love with another.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to hear some closing comments before the questions from the floor, beginning with Dr. Craig for 7 minutes, and then Dr. Atkins for 7 minutes.
In my closing statement, I would like to draw together the threads of this debate and summarize the arguments that have been presented. The question facing us tonight was, what was the evidence for and against the existence of God? And I think it's been very evident in tonight's debate that Dr. Atkins, by his own admission, has been unable to shoulder his share of the burden of proof in providing any argument, any evidence against the existence of God. He's only been able to argue that the God postulate is unnecessary or that my arguments do not prove God. But remember, as Professor Nielsen stated, the failure of an argument to prove a conclusion doesn't show that that conclusion is false. So even if all my arguments fail, at best we're left with agnosticism. And we have not heard any evidence tonight that God does not exist. Now, what about the arguments I gave that God does exist? Well, I think that these arguments still stand. First, the argument from the origin of the universe. We saw that Dr. Atkins agrees that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Secondly, the universe began to exist. He agrees. He doesn't agree that the universe has a cause, however, because he doesn't think that the universe exists. He thinks there is nothing. And I pointed out why this is fallacious. First of all, it is fallacious because even though you have a balance of positive and negative energy, that doesn't mean that there is therefore no energy. If you have a jar of electrons with negative charge and a jar of positrons with positive charge and they exactly cancel out, does that therefore mean there is no energy? Well, obviously not. There is still something.